And here we go. A little bit about myself. I'm an engineer, attorney, decision analyst. My first textbook on decision analysis was published in 1986, now in its fourth edition. My most recent came out in 2016, and my latest chapter on ethics appeared a year ago in Next Generation Ethics, published by Cambridge University Press. So let's start with a little Evolution 101. Species thrive by controlling the environment. The question is, what to control? We could divide that conveniently into other species and everything else, and I would just note that social behavior helps with controlling both of those. If we look at primitive reactions to threat, there's fight, which leads to anger. You could also freeze or hide, accompanied by panic. That's what we're primitively controlled with. To deal better with these challenges, nature has upgraded our computing over time. We have our intuitive supercomputer, which is also called the effective decision system or type 1 thinking. It's fast, easy, intuitive, works well most of the time, goes astray with novelty, complexity, or uncertainty, uses subtle, complex reasoning processes that are difficult to trace, governs emotions, trust, empathy, and action, and is specialized for understanding others' behavior. We also have our deliberative decision system, or slow thinking, which is slower and more effort to invoke, but less prone to error, requires concentration and focus at the risk of frame blindness, uses transparent, logical reasoning, but does not lead to action unless trusted and persuasive. But the biggest advantage of having the two of these is the way they can do data and job exchange. Let's look at how that works. Much of the time, we act intuitively and readily. We perceive the system, we match a pattern. That leads to something that could either be helpful action or a mistake, depending on if we have a correct pattern match. That's acting via intuition, which we do most of the time. But the greatest advantage results from the coprocessors reprogramming the other's routines. Let's look at how that works. You perceive the system, you identify a new situation, and you invoke your coprocessor to figure out and practice the new pattern. Once you've learned it well, you can upload it to intuition and do it automatically. That's the transition from novice to expert in a host of disciplines. If we contrast a constructed computer, it exactly follows the instructions written for it. It cannot deviate from the written instructions and objectives or recognize when they should not apply, and it can arrive at conclusions that people instantly and intuitively recognize as wrong, but nonetheless they lead to action because there is no intuitive supercomputer to make a check on that and figure out that's a wrong conclusion. As one of my co-authors on the latest book, Vint Cerf, put it, a bug is when the computer does what you tell it to do instead of what you want it to do. With decision analysis, which is my specialty, we inform and reprogram our intuitive decision making. We still have the intuitive supercomputer, which we know is subject to motivation, willpower, emotion, and stress, and we want to make use of that and our logical coprocessor. We use intuition to generate the frame, which is the alternatives, information including probability assessments and preferences. We create a logical thinking model to peruse the question of which course of action could be best and why. And from that analysis, we generate insight, and the intuitive synthesis of that we weigh, and that leads to action. Perhaps the greatest challenge, though, is reprogramming our intuitive panic and revulsion at uncertainty. People seek any possible means of eliminating uncertainty. The most common means is assuming it away, such as the old-growth timbers in Notre Dame were slow burning. Another way is controlling what one is able to control, disregarding uncertainty about how well it may or may not work, such as ordering people to stay at home and assuming that will work better than social distancing. A combination of these is believing historical data analysis can eliminate uncertainty about the future. The challenge may be even greater now that vast increases in processing power and data creation storage have enabled big data. Neither artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, or neural networks have solved four fundamental issues. There is no data from the future. We will never have perfect data of the past. The system producing the data is, like everything, in constant flux. More past data may never reveal what future data from the changing or unstable system will be. Further, and maybe most significantly, decisions change the future data. Isn't that the point? For most decisions, there won't be data to prove anything until it's too late. Basing decisions on a data look at historical data is like asking yourself, would you want a car with the driver's seat facing back? Because that's what it is. So data analysis and data is helpful, but as I always say, the truth is never certain and certainty is never true. A few more thoughts to keep in mind. We are, in fact, drowning in data, hoping for information, thirsting for knowledge, and wisdom we haven't seen in a month of Sundays. One other topic we need to bring into this discussion is, what is politics? Recalling our evolutionary framework, I would suggest a definition. Politics refers to the various means humans use to influence or control other humans, and I'll leave it open to you whether you think politics includes parenting. Attitudes towards risk, uncertainty, and control critically shape the political agenda. Is risk seen as acceptable and inevitable, or as a threat to be eliminated entirely? Is uncertainty also taken as a fact, or something to be controlled, ignored, or assumed away? Are efforts well calculated given the risks, uncertainties, and trade-offs, or do they seem focused on what's controllable rather than what makes a difference? And does a quest for data drive and justify efforts, or is there recognition of the limitations of any and all data? Along with politics, we need to recall that eons of human and predecessor species evolution is geared toward in-person communication. Much development is geared toward assessing the environment and especially the emotions and intentions of others. Remote communications were developed an eye blink ago in terms of evolution, and remote means convey a small fraction of the information available in person. As a result, remote means require more cognitive effort and focus and are far more prone to miscommunication. Let's introduce a framework to look at this in a little more depth. So we think in terms of increasing bandwidth, increasing effectiveness of communication, and the converse of that is as effectiveness and bandwidth go down, the potential for distortion increases. At the bottom of the barrel is informal writing, instant but highly subject to misinterpretation, the creature of text. In contrast, formal writing is much better because of the time spent crafting the thoughts. Better than a text always to sort things out is a phone call, better yet as a video call, and best of all is in-person communication. Despite our remote means, which are everywhere, there's still no substitute for an in-person meeting to communicate and deal with the most difficult issues. Given this framework, I would now ask, are pandemic efforts well calculated to minimize the total harm, or for political cover and to convey a false sense of control. Shutdowns and mask mandates, whatever you think about them, they do successfully shift responsibility from government action or inaction to individuals at the expense of those not able to work, shop, and learn from home. Control via data analysis avoids the question of the future impact from decisions and the data not created from the alternatives not chosen. The vast harm from shutdowns receives scant attention, though it may, and the research is starting to emerge on this, be larger than the harm from the pandemic, both economic and public health, including deaths. Plus, isolation wrecks people's cognitive and emotional balance and child development, exacerbating fear, panic, anger, and helplessness. Given that framework for what's going on and how we think about it, I would suggest that a well-calculated pandemic and panicdemic strategy would deal head-on with realities such as risk is unavoidable but need not be debilitating. We can deal sensibly with risk and uncertainty and sleep soundly. Certainty, complete safety, and perfect control are self-destructive illusions. Humanity has long dealt with pandemics, and COVID-19 is not the worst by far. We have natural and developed means to deal with it. Remote can supplement in-person but not replace it. Given those realities, what we can do is use our full cognitive means to consider the full range of risks, uncertainties, and alternatives, and to respond in ways that minimize total harm, and comprehensively work to minimize total harm. And lastly, give people a comprehensive, calm perspective to carry on living with COVID handled appropriately among life's many and inevitable risks and rewards.